long last, player housing is coming to Azeroth. But what does that mean? What will it look like? What purpose will it serve? Will utility be attached to it? What about player power? Will houses be character specific, or will they be account-wide? Will they be limited or not? Will there be a housing crisis? Because I'm a millennial, so let me tell you, the one thing I don't want in my fantasy escapism is any form of housing crisis, so there better not be. But still, it's a question worth asking. I've wanted player housing in World of Warcraft for as long as I can remember, and I've honestly thought about how it would work far more than is healthy for an adult woman who actually lives in an actual home to focus on and decorate. But it does mean I already know some of the answers and feel confident enough to at least hazard a guess on the others. So join me as I do my best using evidence from interviews in-game, the PTR, and other player housing models to predict exactly what player housing will look like and even help you prepare for it right now, because it may actually be on its way sooner than expected. First, it's important to define what player housing won't be, because for the longest time, every time anyone brought up player housing, the most annoying people on the planet would go, World of Warcraft tried player housing already and it was a disaster. That's what garrisons were. I bet you love garrisons, don't you? You dirty player housing desiring garrison lover. And it's true. Garrisons were an early attempt at bringing something like player housing to World of Warcraft, and they were a bit of a disaster, which is kind of a great thing. Not for players back during Warlords of Draenor, obviously, but for the future of player housing, because Blizzard have learned quite thoroughly what not to do in the future. So no, now that player housing is definitely happening, that does not mean we're getting a return of garrisons. And that's not something I'm saying. That's something Ian Hazzikostas himself has made clear on more than one occasion. During a Dragonflight interview with Hazelnutty Games, Ian was asked about player housing and brought up garrisons in his answer, specifically to highlight the limitations they don't want to see in the future. Garrisons only had two looks, Orc Horde and Human Alliance, and Ian recognized the problem with such a lack of diversity.
Doing the garrisons back in Warlords, frankly, due to resource constraints, we were limited in kind of offering, this is the Alliance garrison, this is the Horde garrison. And people were like, well, I'm a Blood Elf. I want cool Silvermoon architecture in my garrison. Why can't I build that? And the answer was like, I mean, that was the original cost you a raid tier joke, but actually it was kind of true. It's like, well, this is how many thousands of hours it would take to make that. That's what player housing has to be, if and when we make it happen.
So right there, we have our very first promise about player housing. Player housing will be diverse. By the far more recent interview with Taliesin and Evertel, Ian was making a much clearer distinction between garrisons and player housing. Like, he really does not want you thinking they're the same thing.
The garrisons broadly, I think that they were never aiming to be housing. They were, a riff on the Warcraft base fantasy of you were leading an expedition and setting up a military base to wage war against the Iron Horde in Draenor.
But he also makes the same promise. Expect diversity from player housing.
And just to ask an obvious kind of like headline question as well, in the sneak peek video that we saw of it, it was very explicitly like a very cool Stormwindy Alliance-y house, which has obviously got some Horde players concerned. Can you confirm that won't be the only option?
Yeah, there'll be more than Stormwind.
Ian does almost immediately go on to start talking about player housing being considered a long-term feature rather than an expansion-specific one. The implication being that even if we don't have every option right away, they do aim to keep building on it, keep adding to it.
As with all features these days, it's the foundation for building in the future, right? So warbands, as we've seen in War Within, are ripping out the character-based underpinnings of the game, replacing them with account-wide ones, but we're going to continue to build and layer features upon that. The other thing I can promise about Housing at Midnight is that it will be the beginning of a long arc and evolving feature, and not just a one-off single expansion feature.
So yes, player housing will be diverse eventually. Player housing has been promised as a midnight expansion feature, but there have already been some hints that we might get a taste of it before then. The 2025 roadmap shows an icon just around the start of winter that has been confirmed to be about player housing. The roadmap doesn't mention Midnight's release, only the expansion reveal around the start of autumn, where we'll learn more about what to expect. But since housing is a Midnight feature, Wowhead speculates that this will mean we can expect Midnight to release in winter as well. And they tend to be pretty good with this sort of prediction, so it's a safe enough bet. But this does still mean housing in some form could be released as a pre-Midnight feature, possibly as a part of the Midnight pre-patch. Which also makes me suspect that our initial glance could be a bit limited. Combined with Ian's, there will be more than Stormwind, before quickly promising that it's also a feature that will constantly be built upon, I wouldn't be surprised if we only get access to 1 or 2 houses at first, potentially one for the Alliance and the other for the Horde. But even if options do seem limited in the beginning, the promise is that they won't stay that way. Unlike garrisons, Blizzard are going to keep adding to the system long after the expansion it was introduced in. At the very least, we already know during Midnight we're heading to Quel'Thalas, so there's no way Blood Elf customization options will be left out of the fantasy this time. In the same interview with Taliesin and Evertal, Ian talks about 2 other major lessons learned from garrisons which will be applied to player housing. First, player housing will not be isolating.
People would be interested to hear your views on what lessons you learned from garrisons in WoD in terms of their design and application, and what you might try to avoid.
I think briefly there, one of the big ones obviously was, I think, the risk of being in a personal instanced environment detracting from the social feeling of the world. And that's something that I think we knew from the very outset was going to be a big challenge we would have to solve and really design around in a core way to make sure that any system we did felt social as opposed to asocial.
Warlords of Draenor is the only World of Warcraft expansion that didn't get a major city. In fact, Bladespire Citadel and the Temple of Karabor were meant to become Horde and Alliance capital cities respectively, but these plans were scrapped in favor of faction hubs in Ashran. Instead, players spent most of their time in their garrisons, little towns which could be built to provide access to everything a player could possibly want, from profession trainers to their own auction house. And this was insane if you think about it. Of course players were left isolated. The only time you might see other players was during the brief moment before entering your garrison when you hadn't been separated into individual instances yet. The isolation was a huge problem, especially for an MMO, so of course it's something they want to avoid in the future. But the more I think about it, the more I don't actually think they need to stress about this one too much. Garrisons were effectively entire towns in the middle of nowhere. All you really have to do to get rid of the isolation element is to make sure the majority of player housing can be found inside already established central hubs, and to also make sure they're not entire self-contained cities on their own. But that doesn't mean the houses need to offer no utility at all. The idea of a house not having a mailbox, for example, seems ludicrous. It would also be a shame if our houses could never include barbershop mirrors or transmog stations, or even profession tables, allowing alchemists to have their own alchemy lab at home, or blacksmiths their own forge. Personally, I think the trick is to not have absolutely everything available at home. Maybe you can only fit one profession table into your house, so you end up picking your favorite. I think it's also worth applying a certain amount of logic to what makes sense inside someone's home. Anything to do with trade, for example, feels like it should require going into town. Take the auction house. I have a Brutus ore mount, so I'm not going to Dornagal's auction house either way, but I'm also not probably mounting up inside my house either, so auctions still give me a reason to be outside around other players. Or maybe you can craft a toy or some intricate jewelry at home, but if I want to buy it from you, I need to visit the marketplace. What's cool is I think Blizzard agrees. My prediction is that player housing will have some utility. One thing that kinda confused me about the profession revamp in Dragonflight is the way that crafting orders are partially separated from the new profession tables. I can fulfill orders at my table, but if I want to place one, I have to go to this vendor. Why not just add 2 more tabs to these tables? Unless Blizzard were already working on player housing and created the profession revamp with that in mind. The tables are something that could very easily end up inside people's houses, but the crafting orders vendor still gives you a reason to leave your home and go into town. If you look at some of the crafting recipes that were made available in Dragonflight as well, there's craftable crafting tables, and even more were introduced during the War Within. These could easily be converted into placeable furniture. And it also means we already have small, medium, and large models, which is something you might expect from a system that would have small, medium, and large rooms to fill. This same line of reasoning, that Blizzard knew player housing was coming and had already started designing certain other things around that, kind of also suggests the barbershop mirrors are indeed something we'll see in houses. Until pretty recently, the interactable object inside a barbershop was always the chair. It was Dragonflight that introduced the interactable mirrors instead. In fact, during Dragonflight, I kept clicking on the chair and then waiting expectantly before remembering I actually have to click on the mirror now, but the mirrors are the new norm. If I had to hazard a guess, I would assume this is because it seems weird to purchase a barbershop chair for your player home, but purchasing a mirror that you can use to check your appearance, well, that makes a lot more sense. So, player housing can, and I suspect probably will have utility, just not enough to make them mandatory. If you don't have a mirror, you can still visit a barbershop, and not enough to make them isolating. Back to Ian, who also made it very clear that player housing will not be tied to player power.
But it also, obviously, as everyone knows, provided quite a bit in the way of player power and rewards and things that could distort gameplay more broadly. Again, we'll have a lot more to say about housing down the line. I can say pretty clearly it's not a player power feature. That's not what we're aiming to do here.
This one's pretty obvious and predictable. Don't make it so that Blood Elf houses create a Blood Elf buff that everyone has to get whether they like Blood Elves or not. I seriously doubt this was ever on the table. Ian also mentions rewards and things that can distort gameplay, and immediately I think about the Garrison Mine and Herb Garden, which essentially killed the mining and herbalism professions. I don't think we'll see that sort of thing again. Another just as obvious way to put this is, player housing will be decorative. Ideally, player housing will accentuate and motivate gameplay rather than distort it. Instead of everyone being able to farm all their own herbs in their herb garden, maybe it's something only herbalists can do. But maybe everyone else can still buy seeds from herbalists, which they can use to grow decorative plants and flowers. Instead of the housing system itself offering rewards, it will be a place to display rewards. This is something we already know for certain will be part of the housing system. The player housing teaser shows decorative trophies, very similar to the ones you can find in the Elder Scrolls Online. You don't need to be psychic to be able to predict the Onyxia's head trophy we see here will have something to do with killing Onyxia. Armor and weapon displays are also very clearly intended, and we've already seen how the trading post uses mannequins to display various items. Though let it be said now that these mannequins better come in all shapes and sizes, because nothing against orcs or anything, but my goblin wants goblin mannequins. Speaking of the trading post, I've long suspected the way it displays mounts and pets is also something that was built with player housing in mind. One of the only really popular features of garrisons was the stables, which would show random mounts from your own collection, and the pet area where your own pets would show up as well. The only major drawback is the randomness. You really want to be able to decide which pets and mounts to have on display. The trading post version is a lot more refined. The mounts and pets are changed according to what's available that month. In other words, these displays are set up in a way where the creatures on display can be intentionally chosen and swapped out. Another thing we're seeing more often in WoW is interactable pets. Quite often you can pet the dog or the cat and get little hearts when you do, and I'd be very surprised if we didn't see that incorporated into player housing pets as well. Oh, and by the way, you can probably start collecting decorations for player housing right now. As I said, the player housing teaser shows decorative trophies as well as weapon and armor racks, most of which are easily recognizable. For example, that sword is Quel'Delar, Might of the Faithful, a reward from the Return of Quel'Delar legendary quest chain from Wrath of the Lich King. That shield is Homebrewer Sampling Mantle, which is only available to purchase during Brewfest. Presumably, displaying these items will require them being unlocked in your appearance collection, which means you can probably prepare for weapon and armor displays just by collecting these weapon and armor pieces now. With all characters being able to learn transmog regardless of armor class, this has never been easier. And again, this feels like it was done in preparation for player housing. I know I've kept certain weapons and armor in my bank before on characters that couldn't use it just because of how cool I thought they looked. And I might not main a paladin, but I'd still love to have the Ashbringer on my hunter main's wall, simply because it's such an iconic part of World of Warcraft's history. So collecting any weapon or armor you find particularly cool is probably worthwhile prep. And it goes without saying, if we do end up being able to display our pets and mounts, and I'm pretty sure we will, then making sure we have decent pets and mounts to display by the time we get housing is worthwhile as well. But there's another type of collectible that up until now you might not have had much use for that will very likely become extremely significant in player housing. Decorative toys. The housing preview clearly shows the Night Elf Huntress Warcraft Rumble toy on display. These toys were part of the Warcraft Rumble cross-platform event in 2023, and like so many things introduced in Dragonflight, really feel like they were made with player housing in mind. Not only are the displays adorable, they change position when you interact with them, so it's literally like having little action figures that you can pose. In fact, the toy box is filled with toys that would make perfect furniture. In fact, it's filled with furniture, from cushions to chairs to tables to beds, banners, cooking stations, holograms, statues, mailboxes, decorative trees, this aquarium thing. The possibilities are endless. All that's needed is some sort of trigger that stops these items from despawning and a way to see exactly how these toys are going to be placed when we use them, and we already have plenty to decorate our houses with. It's also possible that not all decorative items will be account-wide collectibles. Decorative yard flamingos can be purchased from the innkeeper on Siren Isle. They go nicely with the lawn chair toy that is also available, but the flamingos are consumed on use. It's possible that they are a teaser for a toy that will be made available later on, but I think it's also likely that some furniture will just stay consumed on use, which would actually be a good thing. If player housing is going to accentuate professions, it makes sense to give professions consumable items to craft as well as once-off purchases. And this would also help keep the toy box clear of too much clutter. Otherwise, you might find yourself scrolling past pages and pages of candles, cups, buckets, and other knickknacks that really didn't need to be toys at all. That said, I wouldn't stock up on any decorative yard flamingos quite yet. You can always go buy some later. But if there's any decorative toys you really like but haven't collected yet, that I do recommend going for, because I suspect player housing will probably be both account bound and character specific. One thing that annoys me in World of Warcraft is when I spend ages agonizing over the perfect look for my winding slither drake, then log into an alt to find I have to redo the whole thing again. Because while the mount itself is account wide and unlocking the mount's customizations is account wide, the customizations themselves are character specific. This is actually pretty unusual for World of Warcraft. When I add a mount or a pet to my favorites on one character, they favorite it on all others. But it is actually good because it respects character fantasy. A pirate-themed rogue might want a pirate-themed Highland Drake, while an arcane mage might prefer the more traditional Azure look. And I suspect the reason that it's done this way is because it was built with player housing in mind, and player housing will work the same, and rightly so. Your alchemist might want an alchemy lab, but that's not going to be of any interest to your engineer. Your orc might love furniture with spikes on it, but your Draenei might, well, not. Forcing one look across all characters does have the potential to cause as much discontent as forcing everyone to have the same orc or human aesthetic in their garrisons. That said, I do hope Blizzard allows some way to share housing setups between characters. Painstakingly decorating every single house for all 41 of my alts sounds exhausting, even for someone who loves the idea of player housing as much as I do. Once again, there's evidence that Blizzard might already agree. Over on Blue Sky, Keyboard Turner wrote an excellent thread about the data she's found on player housing so far, including the discovery that this system will have some sort of save house feature. But enough about what player housing will have. What will player housing look like? Well, I think player housing will probably look similar to gameplay we've already seen. I don't know about you, but I've noticed a recurring theme in a lot of questlines lately, the placement of decorations. Early in the War Within's main campaign, we're asked to help decorate our newfound headquarters with banners and such. More recently, during the Khadgar questline, we helped set up the new Kirin camp in Tranquil Sand, and with each decoration, a transparent image is placed down first. Of course, we don't get to choose the decorations or where to place them, but remember when I said placing toys will need some way for us to be able to see where they're going? I suspect that in player housing areas, when we choose an item we want to decorate with, we'll see the same transparent image of that item while deciding on its placement. I've also noticed some toys do show you where they're going to be placed, especially the more recent decorative ones. But I like the way the transparent images can be seen clearly, even in the dark. One thing I'm curious to know is just how restricted that placement will be. Garrisons had different plots that could be customized, but the plots themselves were quite literally set in stone. If you look at the trading post, there's something similar going on there. The mounts and pets that are on display change every month, but they're usually placed in the same spots. I mention Elder Scrolls Online a lot. In fact, I co-wrote a whole script for Taliesin and Evertel ages ago about how World of Warcraft should follow the ESO player housing model. But that's because it's a really good model. In Elder Scrolls, you can place your item anywhere you want, but you're restricted by item type. For example, a small room can have plenty of cups and candles, but only one impressive trophy on the wall. I think it's fair to expect the only so many items of this quality restriction. It does help motivate collecting multiple different properties so that you have room for all your trophies, as well as prevent players from creating game-breaking clutter. Whether or not World of Warcraft housing will have similar freedom of movement remains to be seen, but done well, the plot system could still work. If a small room had, say, 6 plots in it, but you can choose what goes in those plots, that still allows significant customization. You could turn it into a dining room, a bedroom, even an inside garden. Alternatively, plots could be something you can move around in place. A mannequin or a wall rack that can be interacted with to replace the weapons or armor on display. A pillar that can be interacted with to change the toy that's being displayed on top, etc. Obviously, I would prefer to be able to move things around rather than the set plot system. In the T&E interview, Ian spoke about being inspired by other MMOs and also about building the tech that was required to make player housing work. So I am hopeful.
We knew that to do it, we were going to need to do it right. We needed to do something that felt worthy of World of Warcraft and felt like a reasonable entry into the MMO genre at this sort of mature stage with many other great examples to be inspired by. But we also needed to build a lot of the tech underpinnings that would allow it to work the way we wanted to.
But what if we think really big? Is it possible that player housing might include customizable houses? Back during Dragonflight, WoW Housing Idea over on Reddit posted an extremely detailed concept for player housing that shows making adjustments to a house in the same sort of menu that we use for character customization. This works because you're choosing from a list of options that are already acceptable to Blizzard rather than designing a house completely on your own, and it makes liberal use of the plot system we've mentioned before. It's a really excellent video. I've linked to it in the description below. The great thing about this concept is how easily it works with systems that are already in place. Obviously, we've seen this style of menu used extensively in the customizable mounts first introduced during Dragonflight. And of course, there's the whole finding manuscripts to unlock these customizations thing. Imagine a unique balcony manuscript, or a Wintervale decorations manuscript to farm during Wintervale. Again, this is something that might actually happen. In her Blue Sky thread, Keyboard Turner also pointed out that houses have decor and components. Decor refers to things like tables or lamps, while components are walls, stairs, pillars, etc. So it is possible we will be able to choose and change these things. That said, if they do introduce this, I don't think it'll be true of all houses, in the same way that it isn't true of all mounts. For houses to be added retroactively to the game, it's necessary to add them to a lot of zones in a way that isn't too obtrusive. Houses that are too customizable might cause too many complications, especially if we're not wanting to isolate players in their own instances too much. A room or house that is customizable on the inside but looks mostly the same on the outside is going to work better in an established city than an area that looks different to everyone and has a little instanced halo around it, in my opinion. Anyway, since you can't possibly collect house customization manuscripts yet, even if they do end up happening, my final piece of advice when it comes to preparing for player housing is this: play through Undermine. When it comes out, I've played it on the PTR and yeah, just play through it all. In this section, I'm going to be talking about Undermine, the upcoming patch which is already available for testing on the PTR. So be warned, spoilers ahead. If you don't want to know anything about Undermine, now is your last chance to stop watching this video. I'm pretty much done with it anyway. I won't be talking about the main quest, but I will be discussing a notable side quest and the Undermine zone in general. This is your last warning. Spoilers. Are they gone? No, you're still watching. What are you doing? Go away. Spoilers. Okay. Like previous zones, Undermine has a Sojourner of achievement earned by playing through significant local storylines in the zone. One of these quest lines, Property Devalued, ends up rewarding you with player housing. No, seriously, it's not fully functional player housing yet, but you can get a room at the end of it that's all your own, with a Hearthstone station so that you can set your Hearthstone there and everything. Think Mr. Pandaria Farm. One thing I found really fascinating about this questline is the way it's been kinda censored. At least at the time of writing, the final quest, Home Sweet Home, has placeholder text and placeholder objectives, which the quest simply skips. When you go to turn in the quest by interacting with your Hearthstone station, you get a placeholder reward. Obviously, this sort of thing happens in the PTR all the time. A placeholder is quickly added just to get the quest out for testing, and it's updated later. But even so, this quest is very clearly handing us a version of player housing, a slightly out-of-date version, but a version nonetheless, and the same questline has purposefully obscured at least some of what's involved and rewarded. I really think we might get to play around with at least some elements of the new player housing system in Undermine. I really do. But what do you think? Let me know what you want to see from player housing in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, all that good YouTube stuff. You can also support me on Patreon. It's these wonderful people whose names you're seeing right now who help keep this channel alive. Finally, you can find me on Blue Sky and Twitch, where I'm always happy to talk about all things lore. So while that's all for now, hopefully I'll see you again soon.